Hello everyone, welcome to the reading room. Today you're going to hear Class 9th Civics Chapter 1 What is Democracy? Why Democracy? What is democracy? Why democracy? A simple definition. Let us get back to our discussion on similarities and differences among governments that are called democracies. One simpler factor common to all democracies is the government is chosen by people. We could thus start with a simple definition. Democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. This is a useful starting point. This definition allows us to separate democracy from forms of government that are clearly not democratic. The army rulers of Myanmar were not elected by people. Those who happened to be in control of the army became the rulers of the country. People had no say in this decision. Dictators like Pinochet child are not elected by the people. This also applies to monarchies. The king of Saudi Arabia rule not because the people have chosen them to do so, but because they happen to be born into the royal family. This simple definition is not adequate. It reminds us that democracy is people's rule. But if we use the definition in an unthinking manner, we would end up calling almost every government that holds an election a democracy. As we shall find out in Chapter 3, every government is contemporary world wants to be called a democracy, even if it is not so. That is why we need to carefully distinguish between a government that is a democracy and one that pretends to be one. We can do so by understanding each word in this definition carefully and spelling out the features of democratic government. Features of democracy. We have started with a simple definition that democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. This raises many questions. Who are the rulers in the definition? Why officials and which officials must be elected for any government to be called a democracy? Which decisions may be taken by non-elected officials in a democracy? What kind of election constitutes a democratic election? What conditions must be fulfilled for an election to be considered democratic? Who are the people who are elected the rulers or get elected as rulers? Should this include every citizen on an equal basis? Can a democracy deny some citizens this right? Finally, what kind of a form of government is democracy? Can elected rulers do whatever they want in a democracy, or must a democratic government function with some limits? Is it necessary for a democracy to respect some rights of the citizens? Let us consider each of these questions with the help of some examples. Major decisions by elected leaders. In Pakistan, General Pervez Musharraf led a military coup in October 1999. He overthrew a democratically elected government and declared himself the chief executive of the country. Later, he changed his designation to president and in 2002 held a referendum in the country that granted him a 5-year extension. Pakistani media, human rights organizations, and democracy activists said that the referendum was based on malpractices and fraud. In August 2002, he issued a legal framework order that amended the Constitution of Pakistan. According to this order, the president can dismiss the national and provincial assemblies. The work of the civilian cabinet is supervised by a National Security Council which is dominated by military officers. After passing this law, elections were held to the national and provincial assemblies. So Pakistan had elections, elected representatives have some power, but the final power rested with military officers and General Musharraf himself. Clearly, there are many reasons why Pakistan under General Musharraf should not be called a democracy. But let us focus on one of these. Can we say that the rules are elected by the people in Pakistan? Not quite. People may have elected their representatives to the national and provincial assemblies, but those elected representatives were not really the rulers. They cannot take the final decision. The power to take final decision rested with army official and with General Pervez Musharraf, and none of them were elected by people. This happens in many dictatorships and monarchies. They formally have an elected parliament and government, but the real power is with those who are not elected. In a few countries, the real power was with some external powers and not with locally elected representatives. This cannot be called people's rule. This gives us the first feature. In a democracy, the final decision making power must rest with those elected by the people. Free and fair electoral competition. In China, elections are regularly held after every 5 years for electing the country's parliament, called Kwangyo Renmin Daibyo Dahui National People's Congress. The National People's Congress has the power to appoint the president of the country. It has nearly 3,000 members elected from all over China. Some members are elected by the army. Before contesting elections of the China, a candidate needs the approval of the Chinese Communist Party. Only those who are members of Chinese Communist Party or 8 smaller parties allied to it were allowed to contest elections held in 2002-2003. The government is always formed by the Communist Party. Since its independence in 1930, Mexico holds election after every 6 years to elect its president. The country has never been under a military or dictator's rule, but until 2000, every election was won by a party called PRI, Institutional Revolutionary Party. Opposition parties did contest elections but never managed to win. The PRI was known to use many dirty tricks to win elections. All those who were employed in government offices had to attend its party meetings. Teachers of government schools used to force parents to vote for the PRI. Media largely ignored the activities of opposition political parties except to criticize them. Sometimes the polling booths were shifted from one place to another in the last minute, which made it difficult for people to cast their vote. The PRI spent a large sum of money in the campaign for their candidates. Should we consider the elections described above as examples of people electing their rules? Reading these examples, we get a sense that we cannot. There are many problems here. In China, the elections do not offer the people any serious choice. They have to choose the ruling party and the candidates approved by it. Can we call this a choice? In the Mexican example, people seem to really have a choice, but in practice, they had no choice. There was no way the ruling party could be defeated even if people were against it. These are not fair elections. We can thus add a second feature to our understanding of democracy. Holding elections of any kind is not sufficient. The elections must offer a real choice between political alternatives, and it should be possible for people to use this choice to remove the existing rulers if they wish so. So, a democracy must be based on free and fair election where those currently in power have a fair chance of losing. One person, one vote, one value. Earlier, we read about the struggle for democracy was linked to the demand for universal adult franchise. This principle has now come to be accepted almost all over the world. Yet, there are many instances of denial of equal right to vote. Until 2015, in Saudi Arabia, women did not have the right to vote. Estonia has made its citizenship rules in such a way that people belonging to Russian minority find it difficult to get the right to vote. In Fiji, the electoral system is such that the vote of an indigenous Fiji has more value than that of an Indian Fijian. Democracy is based on a fundamental principle of political equality that gives us the third feature of democracy. In a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. Rule of law and respect for rights. Zimbabwe attained independence from white minority rule in 1980. Since then, the country has been ruled by ZANU-PF, the party that led the freedom struggle. Its leader, Robert Mugabe, ruled the country since independence. Elections were held regularly and always won by ZANU-PF. President Mugabe was popular but also used unfair practices in election. Over the years, his government changed the constitution several times to increase the powers of the president and make him less accountable. Opposition party workers were harassed and their meeting disrupted. Public protests and demonstrations against the government were declared illegal. There was a law that limited the right to criticize the president. Television and radio were controlled by the government and gave only the ruling party's version. There were independent newspapers, but government harassed those journalists who went against it. The government ignored some court judgment that went against it and pressurized judge. He was forced out of office in 2017. The example of Zimbabwe shows that popular approval of the rulers is necessary in a democracy, but it is not sufficient. Popular governments can be undemocratic. Popular leaders can be autocratic. If we wish to assess a democracy, it is important to look at the elections, but it is equally important to look before and after the elections. There should be sufficient room for normal political activity, including political opposition, in the period before elections. This requires that the state should respect some basic rights of the citizens. They should be free to think, to have opinions, to express these in public, to form association, to protest and take other political actions. Everyone should be equal in the eyes of law. These rights must be protected by an independent judiciary whose orders are obeyed by everyone. Similarly, there are some conditions that apply to the way a government is run after the election. A democratic government cannot do whatever it likes simply because it has won an election. It has to respect some basic rules. In particular, it has to respect some guarantees to the minorities. Every major decision has to go through a series of consultation. Every office bearer has certain rights and responsibilities assigned by the Constitution and the law. Each of these is accountable not only to the people but also to other independent officials. Both these aspects give us the fourth and final feature of democracy. A democratic government rules within limits set by constitutional law and citizens' rights. Summary definition. Let us sum up the discussion so far. We started with a simple definition that democracy is a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people. We found that this definition was not adequate unless we explain some of the key words used in it. Through a series of examples, we worked out four features of democracy as a form of government. Accordingly, democracy is a form of government in which the final decision making power must rest with those elected by people. A democracy must be based on a free and fair election where those currently in power have a fair chance of losing. In a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. A democratic government rules within limits set by constitutional law and citizens' rights. Why democracy? Arguments against democracy. This conversation has most of the arguments that we routinely hear against democracy. Let us go over some of these arguments. First, leaders keep changing in a democracy. This leads to instability. Second, democracy is all about political competition and power play. There is no scope for morality. Third, so many people have to be consulted in a democracy that it leads to delay. Fourth, elected leaders do not know the best interest of the people. It leads to bad decision. Fifth, democracy leads to corruption for it is based on electoral competition. Sixth, ordinary people don't know what is good for them. They should not decide anything. Are there some other argument against democracy? Which of these arguments applies mainly to democracy? Which of these can apply to misuse of any form of government? Which of these do you agree with? Clearly, democracy is not a magical solution for all the problems. It has not ended poverty in our country and in other parts of the world. Democracy as a form of government only ensures people take their own decision. This does not guarantee that their decisions will be good. People can make mistakes. Involving the people in these decisions does lead to delay in decision making. It is also true that democracy leads to frequent change in leadership. Sometimes this can set back big decisions and affect the government's efficiency. These arguments show that democracy of the kind we see may not be the ideal form of government. But that is not a question we face in real life. The real question we face is different. Is democracy better than other forms of government that are there for us to choose? Arguments for democracy. China's famine of 1958 to 1961 was the worst recorded famine in world history. Nearly 3 crore people died in this famine. During those days, India's economic condition was not much better than China. Yet, India did not have a famine of the kind China had. Economists think that this was a result of different government policies in the two countries. The existence of democracy in China made the Indian government respond to food scarcity in a way that the Chinese government did not. They point out government that no large scale families face food scarcity. They point out that no large scale famine has ever taken place in an independent and democratic countries. If China too had multi-party elections, an opposition party and a press free to criticize the government, then so many people may not have died in the famine. This example brings out one of the reasons why democracy is considered the best form of government. Democracy is better than any other form of government in responding to the needs of the people. A non-democratic government may and can respond to people's need, but it all depends on the wishes of the people who rule. If the rules made by rulers don't want to, they don't have to act according to the wish of the people. A democracy requires that the rulers have to attend to the needs of the people. A democratic government is better than other government because it is a more accountable form of government. There is another reason why democracy should lead to better decision than any non-democratic government. Democracy is based on consultation and discussion. A democratic decision always involves many persons, discussions and meetings. When a number of people put their heads together, they are able to point out possible mistakes in any decision. This takes time, but there is a big advantage in taking time over important decisions. This reduces the chance of rash or irresponsible decision. Thus, democracy improves the quality of decision making. This is related to the third argument. Democracy provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts. In any society, people are bound to have differences of opinions and interests. These differences are particularly sharp in a country like ours where has an amazing social diversity. People belonging to different regions speak different languages, practice different religion and have different caste. They look at the world very differently and have different preferences. The preferences of one group can clash with those of other groups. How do we resolve such a conflict? The conflict can be solved by brutal power. Whichever group is more powerful will dictate its terms and other will have to accept that, but that would lead to resentment and unhappiness. Different groups may not be able to live together for long in such a way. Democracy provides the only peaceful solution to this problem. In democracy, no one is a permanent winner, no one is permanent loser. No permanent winner and no permanent loser. Different groups can live with one another peacefully. In a diverse country like India, democracy keeps our country together. These three arguments were about the effect of democracy on the quality of government and social life. But the strongest argument for democracy is not about what democracy does to the government, it is about what democracy does to the citizens. Even if democracy does not bring about better decision and accountable government, it is still better than other forms of government. Democracy enhances the dignity of citizens. As we discussed above, democracy is based on principle of political equality, on recognizing that the poorest and the least educated has the same status as the rich and educated. People are not subjects of a ruler, they are the rulers themselves. Even when they make mistakes, they are responsible for their conduct. Finally, democracy is better than other forms of government because it allows us to correct its own mistake. As we saw above, there is no guarantee that mistakes cannot be made in democracy. No form of government can guarantee that. The advantage in a democracy is that such mistake cannot be hidden for long. There is a space for public decision on these mistakes and there is a room for correction. Either the rulers have to change their decision or the rulers can be changed. This cannot happen in a non-democratic government. Let us sum up. Democracy cannot get us everything and is not the solution to all problems, but it is clearly better than any other alternative that we know. It offers better chances of good decision. It is likely to respect people's own wishes and allows different kind of people to live together. Even when it fails to do some of these things, it allows a way of correcting its mistake and offer more dignity to all citizens. That is why democracy is considered the best form of government. Broader meanings of democracy. In this chapter, we have considered the meaning of democracy in a limited and descriptive sense. We have understood democracy as a form of government. This way of defining democracy helps us to identify a clear set of minimal features that a democracy must have. The most common form that democracy takes in our times is that of a representative democracy. You have already read about this in the previous classes. In the countries we call democracy, all the people do not rule. A majority is allowed to take decision on behalf of all the peoples. Even the majority does not rule directly. The majority of people rule through their elected representatives. This becomes necessary because modern democracies involve such a large number of people that it is physically impossible for them to sit together and take a collective decision. Even if they could, the citizen does not have the time, the desire, or the skill to take part in all the decisions. This gives us a clear but minimal understanding of democracy. This clarity helps us to distinguish democracies from non-democracies, but it is not allow us to distinguish between a democracy and a good democracy. It does not allow us to see the operation of democracy beyond government. For this, we need to turn to broader meanings of democracy. Sometimes we use democracy for organizations other than the government. Just read these statements. First, we are a very democratic family. Whenever a decision has to be taken, we all sit down and arrive at a consensus. My opinion matters as much as my father's. Second, I don't like teachers who do not allow students to speak and ask questions in the class. I would like to have teachers with democratic temperament. Third, one leader and his family members decide everything in this party. How can they talk of democracy? These ways of using the words democracy go back to its basic sense of a method of taking decision. A democratic decision involves consultation with and consent of all those who are affected by that decision. Those who are not powerful have the same say in taking the decision as those who are powerful. This can apply to a government or a family or any other organization. Thus, democracy is also a principle that can be applied to any sphere of life. Sometimes we use the word democracy not to describe any existing government but to set up an ideal standard that all democracies must aim to become. First, true democracy will come to this country only when no one goes hungry to bed. Second, in a democracy, every citizen must be able to play equal role in decision making. For this, you don't need just an equal right to vote. Every citizen needs to have equal information, basic education, equal resources, and a lot of commitment. If we take these ideals seriously, then no country in the world is a democracy. Yet, an understanding of democracy as an ideal reminds us of why we value democracy. It enables us to judge an existing democracy and identify its weakness. It helps us to distinguish between a minimal democracy and a good democracy. In this book, we do not deal much with this expand notion of democracy. Our focus here is with some core institutional feature of democracy as a form of government. Next year, you will read more about a democratic society and ways of evaluating our democracy. At this stage, we just need to note that democracy can apply to many spheres of life and that democracy can take many forms. There can be various ways of taking decisions in a democratic manner as long as the basic principle of consultation on an equal basis is accepted. The most common form of democracy in today's world is rule through people's elected representative. We shall read more about that in chapter 3. But if the community is small, there can be other ways of taking democratic decision. All the people can sit together and take decisions directly. This is how Graham Sabha should work in a village. Can you think of some other democratic ways of decision making? This also means that no country is a perfect democracy. The feature of democracy that we discussed in this chapter provide only the minimum conditions of a democracy. That does not make it an ideal democracy. Every democracy has to try to realize the ideals of a democratic decision making. This cannot be achieved once and for all. This requires a constant effort to save and strengthen democratic forms of decision making. What we do as citizens can make a difference to making our country more or less democratic. This is the strength and the weakness of a democracy. The fate of the country depends not just on what the rulers do, but mainly on what we as citizens do. This is what distinguishes democracy from other government. Other forms of government like monarchy, dictatorship, or one-party rule do not require all citizens to take part in politics. In fact, most non-democratic governments would like citizens not to take part in politics. But democracy depends on active political participation by all the citizens. That is why a study of democracy must focus on democratic politics. Thank you. That was all for today. Let us meet in the next video with another interesting chapter.